Thanks. Alrighty. Hey, everyone. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the VEBA Community Call. Today is April 26th, and we have a good crowd here. Always good to see. Good to see you. From an agenda perspective today, there isn't much. Well, there is a lot in the upcoming release, obviously, but I just have two minor agenda points here talking about the release, the 0.7.3 release, and a PR, which is currently in Knative and that I created as well. And then we have time for open discussion. And so I want to ask, is there anything else that you want to put on the agenda for today? You can put it in the chat or just open the mic. Good. Sounds very good. So let's start with the upcoming release, the 0.7.3 release. All the details are in the GitHub repo under issues and then milestones. We track 2 milestones currently, but the next one will be 0.7.3, which we're initially targeted by end of April, but there are 2 PRs which are pending from David. David couldn't make it today in this call, and so we might slip a little bit on this one here, but that's fine because it's mostly like a feature function release. There's not so much like breaking things or stuff that we need to fix from the 0.7.2 release. So just briefly going through here, we had like 2 bugs, 2 remaining issues, which are bugs, one in an example and one on the proxy side. Patrick is doing a lot of the functions migrations from our old OpenFaaS examples towards the Knative backend that we've been using in recent VEBA releases. And there's also been a bit of documentation updates, and the stuff that we closed out is also more examples, like one from William, where he did one for Zapier, which Zapier is also kind of a workflow SaaS service. And so we had an internal request from someone asking for VEBA integration for Zapier, and William, I think William, you probably did that in 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, about like 5 minutes to write the code, 10 minutes to actually figure out how to use Zapier and get the tokens and all that. And the nice thing for Zapier, for those that are not familiar with it, it's sort of like process automation, business automation, primarily targeting for like non-developers. A good example is like maybe like a marketing email. You have an intake form, and then you want to basically send out a welcome message and stuff. And so it's really useful, and it integrates with several thousand different integrations. And so this was brought up internally, and I was thinking about, I was like, oh, what could I do outside of the basic things that we've done already? And the use case that I end up using, because integrating with like something like Google Docs is probably non-trivial, especially I don't know their API specifically, but I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool like if you had basically failed login attempts that you basically just update a spreadsheet? Nobody does that, right? And so I figured like, hey, connect Zapier, and it's really easy to use the Zapier interface because it just takes in an incoming webhook. So if you've set up Slack, it's literally the exact same thing. So from a coding standpoint, super easy copy and paste. But the cool thing about Zapier is once you set up that incoming webhook, you basically send it an arbitrary JSON body. So you as the end user describe what the input is. And so for this particular demo or example I created was like, a failed login in vCenter creates a payload. So I take the username. The nice thing about the failed login in vCenter is it also captures the client source IP. So this is actually a really useful piece of information to track to see if that, somebody's trying to attempt to attack your vCenter server, whether it's internal or even hosted publicly on the internet. Hopefully that's not the case. And then you can also get the timings of where this is happening. So I just create an arbitrary, push data with that response. And when you set up the incoming webhook, you can basically test it. So, you can use Postman, you can use curl or PowerShell to basically send in some dummy data. And what that does is it basically tells Zapier what is that payload, and it starts to parse out these tokens for you automatically. And this is all done through their GUI. So there's no like coding on the side and stuff, right? So you create a webhook, you give it a name, and then you say what kind of data is coming in, you send in the data, and then you can map those tokens to something. And so for my example, I basically wanted to connect to Google Docs and basically store this information as a new row within an Excel spreadsheet. So I just go to my Google Docs, authorize my current Gmail account, the form and the document, and then you map those parameters into the fields that you want for each of the columns in the spreadsheet. So it automatically does all that processing for you. And so if you had to kind of like manually do this, you would have to kind of understand the Google APIs, authorization there, set up a webhook. And so Zapier makes it, super trivial. And so, like I said, probably spend more time reading the Zapier documentation than the act of doing it. And so like literally in 10 minutes time, I was able to get the PowerShell code on the VEBA side, setting the events in and then testing that out. So so that's that in a nutshell, and it's already been merged. So if anybody's interested in taking a look at that or exploring Zapier, they do have like a free tier, but the webhook is part of their premium tier, which you can have access to, I think, for like the first 10 days or so. So pretty cool stuff.
Cool. And I think also we see the same pattern of like, once you're into like writing these functions, and we have all these the templates for PowerShell, Power CLI. We've seen this with Patrick. He was like pretty quickly able to ramp up, and like he's just cranking out all these function examples now. And I think most of the time from porting over from OpenFuzz to Knative is just the rewrite in terms of adopting the cloud events and all the standards that we have established since then. But I think, Patrick, most of the logic just remains, right, from these functions that you port over.
Yeah. It's not that hard to move it over. I'm adding some more try catches and making some of the stuff a little more robust, but most of the work is the documentation, since we're a little stricter on that now, and actually setting up the environments to be able to do some of the testing. That's what takes longer than the code. 95% of the code's reusable.
Right. And Patrick did a great job on the template. So here he has, let me just see. Yeah, we are in the right one. Knative, is it here in templates? Yeah.
It's in Power CLI. It's one up.
Oh, one up.
Power CLI. Yep.
Template. Yeah. Perfect. So if you basically want to write a PowerShell, Power CLI, like minor differences, but mostly the same, then this template is really there for you. And Patrick has kind of described how you can use the template and adopt it easily for your own function types. So, and I think that's also what you're doing, right? You're probably basing it off mostly from the template there, Patrick.
Yeah, that's what I do, right? Use my own stuff. I copy that folder and customize it every time for the new function. So
perfect. Yeah. So the 0.7.3 release, even though it was just supposed to be a very small one with like 1 or 2 fixes, it's actually getting bigger. So it's more like a major, but we'd still want to keep it with the 0.7.3, like with the 0.7 branch, because 0.8 is going to be this change towards fully embracing the Knative sources that we're working on to replace then the event router, the custom event router bits that we're currently using. And speaking of which, this is where the source code for these like true Knative sources live. There's already a vSphere source in this repo, which we're going to use. And then this is the one that mimics the Horizon implementation in the event router. So it's literally the same code. It's just wrapped into this Knative standard there. And then the last one missing is the webhook, where someone from Trigger Mesh is currently working on that implementation. And so once we have them in place, then we can do the migration to fully Knative sources, basically. Any questions so far on the milestone and the Knative pieces? Okay, and then I was just reminded myself that there is that I have a KubeCon talk coming for KubeCon Europe, and I think this is a hybrid event, like virtual and on site. And I was asked to participate in the VMware user group at KubeCon, and the user group owner asked me to do something about event-driven automation, and I'm currently thinking about writing a function which does at least an alerting on tag and like rack zone drift. Why is this important? Most of our users are actually running Kubernetes on vSphere, and this creates a problem because Kubernetes is kind of a scheduler, vSphere is a scheduler, but because of vSphere, vMotion, and DRS and all the stuff, it can happen that VMs actually migrate between racks and or even data centers, and Kubernetes is not aware of this. And customers have solved this, like with custom scripts and notifications and alerts that they have kind of set up. But with events and with VEBA, this is actually pretty easy because you will actually get an event, a VM migration event or a DRS migration event. And my idea for the KubeCon talk is to just do a Slack notification and to showcase what the right host or the right host group for that VM actually would be if there's a violation, and then maybe have a Slack action where you can click reconcile or migrate back or whatever. So the VM would actually try like being migrated back to the original host in case of a DRS violation. Yeah. And then I was thinking, because most of our functions do Slack, like we have an alerting function, we have something in NSXT, which does port group stuff, I think. But Slack doesn't give us a generic way of describing an event unless we do a path through. What do you think? Should we come up with like a generic Slack function which just copy pastes the message body over to Slack, or is that not really useful at the end of the day?
When you say message body, you mean the Slack?
The cloud event, the cloud. Yeah. So in Slack, right, you have to.
Oh, you mean just do a pass through of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It depends on what the context is. I mean, for me personally, a lot of it is just noise. So to me, I want to extract out certain tokens and maybe even do transformation. And this is why like generic webhooks, if the payload has what you need, it's probably okay. But in some of the vSphere events, they're pretty chatty. If you look at like a reconfig task, right, that can be an arbitrary gigantic payload, and then it becomes unusable and spams your channel. So I personally prefer to extract out the things that's useful for me, and then transform the data. So I guess it just depends. I mean, pass through is the easy one, but I feel like there's probably gonna be examples where that breaks down. So I mean, if you're showing a really basic example, maybe that's okay, but I don't know about making it like completely generic.
Yeah.
That reason.
And then also the integrations wouldn't work, like reconciling stuff. Also, these actions are very specific, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I haven't seen a case where somebody just wants to get like all events of some type, because it just becomes noisy. Even like failed logins, for example, you probably wanted it to go somewhere specific. Yeah, maybe just kind of talking through some of the things that we've seen, some of the cool things that people have built, like the what was it, the vMotion one, the resource pool vMotion one using I forget that mobile client. Blanking here, but there's a pretty neat demo that somebody was asking about. What was it? Yeah, I think it was Power CLI.
Oh, really?
What is it? Telegram. Remember the Telegram example?
That was you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But remember, we spoke with a customer that's what they were. That's what they wanted to do, right? Is that they wanted to send a Telegram message when a VM was fully migrated, because this was kind of like a managed provider. So they had multiple set of customers, and they kind of wanted to just know when certain workloads were moved over to the new infrastructure. And for these customers, Telegram was the means of communication versus email or Slack, right? So
right.
Just kind of talking about some of these examples just to kind of show like, hey, it's more than just kind of the basic Slack scenarios. That's
true.
Useful.
Yeah, I will actually go through. I was thinking about going through our functions page here, which I think good captures some of these use cases pretty well.
Yep, exactly.
Okie pokey, that's all I had for today. We can have an open discussion now if you guys want, or I give you back some time.
Oh, I see Scott joined us. Hey, welcome, Scott. It's been a while.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for
man. Did you catch the KubeCon stuff that I was just talking about, Scott?
I did not. I just joined.
Ah, okay. So because you said you will be at KubeCon, are you coming?
I am, yeah.
Cool. So there's the VMware user group, like meeting session that, you know, these kind of 6 special interest groups that they have.
Right.
And I don't know when, if the schedule is already out for that, but I like, it would be great if you could come by, because I want to talk about some of the community examples, and especially yours, obviously, and then do maybe 1 or 2 demos, because the idea was that the user group leader asked us to do something with like VEBA and vSphere, and, you know, the zones, the reg affinity migrations and all the stuff, and the violations. This is a common one for Kubernetes and vSphere, right? Which you kind of fixed already. And so I was thinking about doing a demo, like a small one there. But if you would could come by, that would be great too.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
I will. I'll be there all week. So yeah,
nice.
for sure we'll be there.
Cool.
Awesome.
So
It'll be nice to finally meet you in person.
Likewise, Scott. Likewise. So we are in open discussion mode now. So bring up your topics, or questions, or issues, and if not, then then we're good for today. I'll just wait here a bit.
I've got one. You can feel free to slap me down if this is a bad idea. With the VEBA appliance upgrades, especially the minor point releases, has there been any thought to an in-place upgrade procedure, whether that's like a pack of YAML manifests that just have to be applied to the stack to kind of, you know, pull new images in, or, you know, change secrets, config maps, whatever may be needed, instead of having to do a full appliance redeployment?
William, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, we've had discussions around it. It's non-trivial. I think we were thinking about you know, an option of kind of like this migrate option. There's been no technical work done on that, Aaron. It's something that's we'd like to do. It's just it's a non-trivial thing, and that's part of the challenge. And also we wanted to really focus on kind of the VEBA value add. So lifecycle, you know, it's a complex thing, right? Because there's lifecycle, not just the components. There's lifecycle of just the business logic between how things are set up, and you know, that has changed over different releases, which becomes difficult when you think about an upgrade itself. And then more importantly, also the operating system changes. Like, for example, in our prior release, you know, we were using the Docker runtime, and just really switching it up and making sure that, you know, so it ends up being a lot of different combinations that we need to test. And, you know, for something like a Fling, it just felt a high bar for us, and it wasn't really warranted for us to invest our cycles, because we only have so much resources, right? And so it's definitely one of those things where we'd like to have an option, and I think, you know, in the future maybe that's a possibility. But really, we're trying to focus on continue innovating on the features that really impact our users. And then, you know, we certainly hear from a class of users who want to have a commercial based offering, and then also align our open source project with sort of the commercial offering in terms of the user experience. That way, you know, you don't need to kind of pick and choose, like, hey, you know, if I want Horizon, I have to use the Fling, and if I want, you know, support or a commercial offering, I have to use this other option. We don't want to force users into that kind of mode. So that's really been the focus for the team. I think once those kind of get cleared out some bits, and if we get some more feedback, you know, we can certainly have a, you know, active participation from the community around what they like to see in terms of what we might be able to do from an upgrade, and kind of easing that aspects of it.
Okay.
Aaron, besides like redeploying the functions and all the stuff, what would you say is like taking the most time, or is the most complex, challenging task that you have when a new VEBA release comes out?
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's mostly having to dust off my memory on all the steps required to communicate to my internal Horizon and Git repo that we have internally with self-signed certs. And thank you, William, for posting that blog article following last meeting. That was a big help, and I was able to get my lab back online with the newer version.
Awesome.
I've been able to do some testing there, but it's those types of operations, and then all of the custom secrets that I have for my vSphere environment. I don't put those in my Git repo for security reasons, so it's not too bad. The last time around, I just exported them out of the previous older version and then imported them into the newer version, so it was a pretty quick in and out routine, but
Yeah, I think on the secret side, depending on how you use Git, like certainly there's sort of a spectrum, right? Some folks might deploy this infrequently, and so most of it's just kind of done manually, and then they're pretty happy with it until the next major release that has some significant changes. If you want to get more into like a streamlined deployment where like, hey, these appliances can almost be treated as stateless to a certain degree, right? Because all of the valuable things is really lies in the functions that you've got, all those configurations. And so, you can do something as simple as just having a simple shell script for automating the deployment of the appliance. There's some examples in the repo, to something as like a quick shell script that will go ahead and automatically build out, all the secret configurations. If you're using something like Git and all that, you could store the secrets, obviously not directly in the repo, but, GitHub does have GitHub secrets and all that. And that's used for a number of kind of Git operations, automation, CI/CD. We do something similar of that nature. And so you could store those things there, which are secured, and then those get read in as environmental variables. And you could have a private repo, right, that manages the deployment. And that way you can basically, script all that one time, right? And then as you have new infrastructure, you can basically add that to your deployment scripts, and then that becomes something that you can also automate and manage longer term. And I get that not everybody may want to do that, especially if they have a smaller environment. But if you have a sizable environment, or if you want to easily try out different versions of VEBA, I normally script my deployments. We've added so much functionality in VEBA that, even if you go through the vSphere UI, it does take you a few minutes to fill in all the parameters. So maybe something to consider if you haven't thought of that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I'm really weak on the DevOps side, being the products side of the house. So it's a lot of these are learning opportunities, and unfortunately,
absolutely.
time
Yeah, even just like a
is
simple shell
constraint.
script. Yeah, even just a simple script that will just go and run those commands, right? You can definitely take that. You can run the commands on the appliance, if you don't want to kind of have external dependencies, or you can just copy off the Kubernetes secret out to your local system, and then just run a local script that has all of your credentials somewhere, stored securely. There's definitely a number of ways of streamlining the deployment, but hopefully that won't be too painful.
Okay. Well, thanks for the hints.
Yep.
Aaron, anyone else?
Just a comment.
Robert.
Yeah, really just a comment. I was really happy to see that, Patrick, that you ported the HA function from OpenFast to Knative backend. That's really cool.
Yeah, that used to be one of my favorite ones to demo, so I wanted to get it back.
Yeah, really great work. Thanks.
Thanks.
Right.
Any other folks that want to add any commentary or feedback? I know, Scott, we haven't seen you in a while. I don't know if you've been doing anything fun with VEBA. I know a while back ago, Scott, you were doing some things with like Carvel tooling and some of that. And I know that we had talked about, maybe that could be an interesting way of just simplifying the setup of VEBA. But I don't know if you've done any work there. You've been kind of busy with your day job and all that. I know you've been doing.
Yeah, and I've actually just recently started to pick that back up. The idea of the Carvel package, it's working internally, but very limited right now. I'm trying to add support for automatically trusting certificates, other things like that. But currently I'm working on a Carvel package, and I think I should be able to release probably in the next few weeks, that will have an optional installation of Knative, but would work with an existing one as well. Would also install the RabbitMQ operator, as well as a RabbitMQ cluster, and would install a package that I built for local CA injection, so that the Kubernetes cluster can trust any additional certificates as well. So if you're using a private registry, so a bunch of optional parts within the package. It would be just one large package for VEBA. I'm working on that right now and basically building out the value schema for what that'll look like, but I have all the parts together. So hopefully in a matter of a few weeks, I should be able to put that out on GitHub.
Yeah, no, that sounds really awesome. And maybe we should, as you get closer, maybe we should get you on one of the future VEBA calls so you can kind of show us how that works. I mean, I'd certainly love to see how the internals of the Carvel tooling that you're using and all that.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, I built a tool that translates any Helm chart into a Carvel package automatically. So once I built that, it became relatively easy to take anything and make it into a Carvel package. And luckily there's a Helm chart for different parts. So yeah, just have to do a bit more work there, but then this also works completely air gap because I'm using image package. So everything can basically be deployed in an air gapped environment very easily with a single command.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, I know that's been coming up a lot in some of the Tanzu application platform and TCE stuff. And so I think as we kind of move towards our 8.0 release with unifying with the vSphere sources and CNR, I think this will be very relevant, and if not just another example on how to set this up, you know, deploy a whole VEBA component in an air gap setup. So yeah, no, look forward to when you get that, and just let us know, and we'll get you added to the calendar.
Definitely. I'll ping you guys once I have that, you know, once I have something that's, you know, ready to be shown, and then definitely will be glad to join a call and show it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Todd, you've been pretty quiet. Any thoughts, feedback, comments?
I still haven't had a chance to do a whole lot. I have VEBA set up on a Kubernetes cluster, and I did the upgrade to 7.2, but I haven't had a chance to play with it at all yet.
Got it. Were there things that you were thinking about? Maybe not necessarily tried them out yet, but were there certain things that you were like, hey, these are kind of low-hanging fruit things that you'd like to try to see if you can kind of get VEBA to do for you, use cases in mind, things you're still exploring, anything along those lines?
I had an older version of the appliance deployed, and I did some testing, like with the HA failover function that emailed the VMs out and things like that. But I haven't really gotten beyond that.
Okay. So is it more of notification are the use cases you're thinking of, or were there certain things that you're like, I want to try to figure out how to do this with VEBA, like any of that you're thinking about, or things that we can help with?
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about is we have a bunch of internal monitoring tools that we use, and the application teams are very interested in things like vMotions and whatnot in the vSphere environment. But we don't want them in our vCenters continuously pulling events.
Yep.
So I was thinking about possibly just duplicating vCenter events into a database that they could hammer away at.
Got it. And when you say the application wants information like vMotion, do you know the context behind it? Like, are they seeing or observing or perceiving that there is performance degradation, or they try to optimize? Okay.
So some of our applications are so sensitive that a vMotion causes delays in processing. I mean, it looks minor from the external source, but the way they have the monitoring set up, you know, they see a spike on the chart and get all up in arms about it.
Got it. And so they kind of want to see when that workload moves and see if there's any kind of direct correlation or indirect correlation.
Exactly.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, this one's an interesting scenario, right? Because we kind of see this in so many different facets of it, right? We've seen cases where like, hey, security team needs to come in and kind of do an audit. I still remember having to do this for a customer when I was a customer, and I literally had the auditor sit right behind me. And I wish I had something like VEBA. And it was just weird because it's sort of like, you know, the rule is like, don't click on extra screens that they're not supposed to see, and only click on these places to make sure like, hey, you know, you're doing what you need to do, right? I think anybody that's gone through an audit, you know, you've probably seen that. And it happens for a number of reasons, right? Whether it's informational, compliance purposes, you want to do some advanced analytics, you know, for another organization I used to work for as a large enterprise, they actually wanted to look at the various types of operations that were happening in the infrastructure because they were the automation team. And when we kind of spoke with VMware performance engineering team, they're like, well, depending on how you do the API calls, there may be ways you can kind of batch them up, get better performance, especially with back in the days. And really, we're talking about like, you know, vSphere 4.x days. where some of the calls on the internal backend database that vCenter sat on, the way that the schema was set up, the way that they were doing locks, they were not as optimal as they could be. So, the ability to basically just dump out all your VM-based operations and kind of seeing what are those API calls behind the scenes allowed somebody to kind of do that analysis, right? And you can do it for a number of reasons. You kind of say, hey, what are the most common OSs deployed in my config? Could I create these kind of t-shirt sizing so that it becomes easier for my organization to come in and pick the workload sizes and go off and go do something useful versus like, well, do I create snowflakes? And so there's all this sort of analytics you can do on this information, but obviously to be able to do it, you need to expose them to vCenter, right? And you wouldn't want to do that for a number of reasons, right? Especially for security purposes, but also potentially misuses of the APIs that could cause a negative impact. And so being able to really pick like a vMotion event, which is super trivial with VEBA, like I said, it's a one-liner, and you can send that off, and that can be, a spreadsheet. You can send it into like a relational database where, analytics team can go in and use the tooling of their choice. And inspect that, right? So you can give them the full payload, or you can select what data you want them to be able to see. In some cases, the data could be very sensitive. In other cases, you may not care. And so you can translate that. I think even at one point in the VEBA, life cycle, Michael and I were talking about a Kafka example. Maybe we need to, rehydrate that project, but it was literally that, like, let's take out specific VM events, dumped out that into a Kafka database. And then you can use all the Kafka, tooling, visualization to go do that analysis. And so I think what you're thinking about, definitely resonates and works really well from a VEBA standpoint. And so it'd be interesting to see how that goes for you when you get the chance to kind of implement that, or if you have issues, feel free to reach out on Slack.
Hey, Todd.
Yes.
Do you happen to run like Log Insight or any logging backend, or maybe the team does?
Yeah, we have Log Insight.
Yeah, because like a very super easy solution would be that you would just set up a function which dumps the event to standard out, like it just prints it out. And because we in VEBA Robot did the like syslog or Log Insight integration, you would then automatically just forward that event. You don't even have to do anything in your function. And then in Log Insight, you can give someone access to, with a role-based access control to specific logs or log groups. And so that's where they can then query for migration events, for example. And so that would be a very simple one. You would just print or echo stuff out, and then you can search for that in Log Insight.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's another good example. Yeah, I guess it just depends if you've got like a database that already has different types of information that they want to use. If you don't end up having to build all of that from scratch, and it may not warrant it in like Michael's solution, right? You can still capture the vMotion event and basically just print it out and then forward that to your syslog endpoint, and then that becomes the interface, right? But if the team wanted to use like, analytic tools or maybe like a database tool, if they've got like some tooling that already it does this analysis, then you can kind of basically integrate into that database solution and insert those new pieces of information.
Yeah, the reason why I mentioned this is that with a function, when you have to write it to a database also, there's like, you need to make sure that the call succeeds and also persist that, versus for the logging, you don't have to do anything. It would just be handled for you automatically. No transactions, nothing.
Yeah, no, good point on that.
Cool. I had one question that just came to mind, and I think this would also probably be a good one where we have a larger number of folks in the call. I was thinking about, especially like Todd mentioned, like he sets this all up, but didn't really have the time to play with it. And especially if you do it for the first time, writing a function can be maybe a little bit hard because you have to read all the stuff up, even though Patrick did a great job there. So should we do maybe like a 15-20 minute function prototyping session in one of the next calls where we go through like a Power CLI example, for example? We can even use one that exists and we go through that. Or is this too easy? Oh yeah, Robert, thumbs up. Okay.
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
We can always pull the Slack channel just to get more feedback. I suspect for folks like Aaron and Scott, you guys are VEBA experts at this point. But for others that, are just new, that want to kind of get the lay of the land, or just get some examples, or maybe bring in a real life example, depending on how complex it is, we might even at least be able to stub out some high level code. But we should also pull the Slack channel too, and see if that's something useful. We can have a active coding session.
Cool. All right, we'll do.
That's a good idea though, Michael.
Yeah. Perfect. Anything else?
I also just had one question I think, Michael, you built the Helm chart, right? For the event router?
Yeah.
Yeah. It currently does not support multiple event sources. Is that something that, because we're moving to the VMware sources, would not be worked on, or is that something that I should open an issue for? Just wondering, because currently the appliance can support multiple event providers, but the Helm chart doesn't, because it doesn't have like a for Go templating around the event router. And that's currently a single string instead of a array of providers.
Yes, so the router basically mimics the configuration of a single router instance, which can only handle one processor, right? And the trick that we do in the multi-processor appliance installation is that we stamp out multiple routers, and this is also the recommendation for the Helm chart. You can like easily use different value files, and then create multiple
so
Helm
do
deployments.
Multiple Helm installs, just install multiple times, basically.
Yes, yeah, because that also gives you more granularity over the life cycle of each installation. For example, you have a Horizon and a vCenter one, and you might want to do vCenter upgrades. Well, then those might be impacted. And if it's like one Helm chart, then the Horizons one will also be impacted somehow, right? Otherwise, you would have to implement logic to not touch the Horizon ones, blah blah blah. And so this makes it much easier. And yes, as you said, with migrations towards Knative, all the sources. Let me just quickly jump here. That you create the vSphere sources, which are Kubernetes resources, right? You basically create this stuff here. Let me zoom in a bit. This is a one-to-one anyways. And so you would have to create like several or multiple of these custom resources for each provider source, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah, you would create a vSphere source per vSphere, or a Horizon source for each Horizon.
Yes. And if you have 3 VCs, that's going to be 3 vSphere sources. And again, this gives us much more control and granularity over different like settings and prod and dev and also lifecycle. And it's also more scalable. And that's why we also build the router in a way that it will only ever handle one source and one destination, because that's much more flexible and scalable as well. And also tenant isolation, security, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Now I get that.
Good question.
And is the plan for 0.8 to move to the Knative sources?
Yes. Yeah. So the plan is, because we already have the vSphere sources available there, the next one is, which is currently already as a PR, is Horizon. And for Horizon, the behavior will be the same as the current one. The only things that will change from the router to these Knative sources is some cloud events field, because right now in the router we use the subject field for the event name, whereas in Knative, in these kind of sources, we are using the more appropriate type field in the cloud events. And this requires either changes on the trigger, right? Because right now the triggers are on subject and not on type, or not just on type, or also changes in the code, depending on if your function accesses these kind of metadata attributes in a cloud event. Some functions do, some don't. And again, those are minor changes, right? The rest will actually be much more improved. For example, you will get checkpointing out of the box with the sources.
Okay. Yeah, I've used CNR, which is using this. So, okay, awesome.
Yeah, and the code base is the same. And we are mainly maintaining currently actually on the Knative side, like all the improvements go in there, as we do want to migrate over to these kind of sources there.
Okay, awesome.
Yes. Alrighty. Last call, anyone?
All right, let me stop the recording.